In this video, I'll be showing you how to quantize notes in MIDI. Now, the first question you might be wondering is, well, what is quantizing, or what does it mean to quantize something? Well, in this context, basically what the quantize feature does in Logic is it makes everything you played in time. So that's the short answer. There is a bit more to it though, which I'll get into later on in the video. So if I played something ever so slightly before the beat, or after the beat, I can make it so that all of the notes are right on the beat, so they're perfectly in time. So for example, initially when I played this second chord here, it might look like I played it in time and on the beat when I zoom out like that. But if I go and zoom in, so you can see that first of all, I didn't actually play the notes at the same time. And secondly, those notes weren't right on the beat. See, the exact line is actually there. And I played the chord a little bit after it. When you listen back to it, it might sound pretty much in time, but this is showing that I didn't actually play right on the beat. Now, something you can do, which I showed you how to do in the previous videos, is manually get these notes and drag them onto the start of the line. So if I really wanted to, I could go through every single note individually and meticulously make sure they're all right on time. But that's just an incredibly long thing to do, and it can get really wearing very quickly if you're doing that to every single little note. So instead of doing that, what you can do is you can use the Quantize tool. So if I just take these back to after the line, and if I highlight them, so I'll highlight them again, and then go over here to where this Q is, and click Quantize, it will automatically shift those notes back to the line. So the key command for that is Q on your keyboard, which will make things quicker for you. So if I just do it again, so highlight, Q, and those notes are right on the beat. And you don't have to go through every single note to quantize them. You can do it for individual notes, just like I did here, but you can also do it for a whole section. So if what you played is pretty much in time and only slightly out in certain areas, what you can do is quantize the whole thing. So if I take a look at what I played in here, just so you can see. So there I was a bit early. And if we look at the next note, again, slightly early. And again, I'm a bit early again. So you kind of get the idea. And don't necessarily get bummed out about very, very small errors, as it were, in timing. And part of me doesn't want to use the word errors as such, because that's just playing music like a human. You know, we're not robots. We're not going to play every single note in a piece of music exactly in time. Even if you've been a musician for years and years, you're not going to be 100% accurate 100% of the time. Obviously, it's a completely different story if you are noticeably out of time. Now, let's say that I want all of these piano notes here to be played exactly on the beat. So what I do is highlight all of them. And if you wanted to quantize just this section, for example, you can. The key command for selecting all the notes here is Command A. So you can do that as well if you prefer. Now this is set to 1/8 of a note right now. You have to be careful sometimes which one you pick, but I'll get more into that in part 2. For what I'm doing right now, this is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and quantize. Now you might not have noticed a difference from this far out, but if I zoom in and check these, you'll see that they're right in time. So they're exactly on the beat. And this whole piano section has been quantized. So that's what quantizing in Logic is, and that's how you do it. In part 2, I'll be taking you a little further on this. So I'll go more into this menu on the left here. and I'll talk a bit more about the strength and swing options that are available just below it when it comes to using the Quantize tool. Welcome to part 2 of this Logic tutorial on quantizing notes in MIDI. This is actually going to be part 2 of 3, because as I was putting the content for this video together, I realised I needed more time to cover what I wanted to cover. So this will carry over into a part 3. So in the last video we went over using the Quantize tool and how to quantize a whole section of notes as well as individual notes. In this video I'm going to be going a bit more in depth with this menu on the side here. And I was going to go into the strength and swing sliders, but that will now go over into part 3. So over the course of part 2 and part 3, I'll explain why you might want to make changes here when it comes to quantizing your music. Now I'm going to be using this little section here to demonstrate these tools that we've got. I'll just play it quickly for you along with the click, just so you can hear how it's sounding. Now actually, before I move on to the tools on the left here, I'll show you something else you can do when it comes to quantizing, or even just editing notes in MIDI. So the first thing that I noticed there was that these notes on the one, so the notes on the first beat of the bar, are slightly off. So these ones here. And I'd say those notes are a little more important when it comes to having your music in time, as opposed to maybe other beats along the bar. And that's because you generally want to keep that pulse on the one pretty bang on. So beat 1 of the bar, you generally want that at least very close to being on time, especially if it's the first beat of a whole new section. So let's say you're going into a chorus or a new verse, that moment of transition, you generally want that to be right on the money, or at least very close to. So something you might want to do is quantize just those notes. Let's just say you wanted to quantize certain notes only. So the way you do that is by holding down Shift and then clicking the notes that you want to quantize. And that's how to select specific multiple notes. And I can just quantize those notes if I want. Now, let's talk a bit about this menu here on the left-hand side. Now, this menu is somewhat related to what you can see on the grid here. So from 3 to 4, that's 1 bar. And you can see this bar is split up into 4 separate chunks here. So 4 quarters. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if we look at the first quarter, you can split that in half. So that would be 1/8 of a beat. You can split it up even further, so that there would be 1/16 of a beat. So 16 of those make up a whole bar. 8 of those make up a whole bar. 4 of those make up a whole bar. And that's half a bar. Those watching who know their basic music theory, you'll probably already know that, but yes, some may not. And this leads into the next section. So, depending on which option I click here, when I quantize something, it's going to snap to the closest point. So, if I did quarter note, it's going to snap to the closest quarter note. So the quarter notes there. If I pick an 8th note, it will snap to the closest 8th note. So you have to make sure you kind of pick the right option. An example of clicking the wrong option would be if I were to select this, so to snap to the closest whole beat. So let's see what happens when I do that. And that's completely messed up what I played in. So all of the notes there have snapped to the closest full bar. So to the 3 or 4. So just be aware which one you pick, because you can highlight a whole section of something, quantize it, and certain notes might snap to places where you don't necessarily want them to go. So the one that would work for this is snapping to every 8th note. So if I select 8th note here, and then quantize, so you can see that I quantized that. It was pretty much in time anyway. I'm just fine-tuning really. And that would work for the 16th note as well. Now I'm just going to undo what I've quantized, just so I can show you something else here. So I'm going to zoom in on this particular note here. Now notice what happens to this note when I quantize to the closest 32nd note. So where I should have hit this note was on this line here. So I hit it pretty early. Now if I quantize to the nearest 16th note, that will go there. So that will fix it. But if I do it to the closest 32nd note, and see what happens there, it actually shifts a bit to the left, because the closest 32nd note is to the left of the note. So it actually ends up being more out of time to what I actually want it to be. So just be aware of that when using the quantize tool. So essentially just remember that the notes here will quantize to the nearest quarter note, 8th note, 16th note, etc. So I'll just quantize this bar. Hopefully that was somewhat clear. I appreciate I may not have explained it in the best way, but yeah, have a bit of a play around with it yourself as well, and you'll probably get used to working with it. I'm going to continue over in part 3, where I'll look more into the other options here, and I'll go over the strength and swing tools. I'll also talk a bit about human feel as opposed to something sounding quite robotic. Now you'll notice that there's lots of different options here, but for the majority of music making you'll be using just this top section, and maybe 8th and 16th notes in terms of the triplets. So the triplet section is for when you've got groups of 3 going on, so as opposed to a more straight rhythm, like you might have triplets, groups of 3 in there. Now down here we have swing values. So to give you a bit of an idea about what they do, if I select this one here, so this will give it more of a swing rhythm. And what these letters in the menu do is essentially accentuate the level of swing, so make the swing more prominent or noticeable. So these notes are going further to the right, away from beat 1. So moving on to the next section in the menu. The tuplets are non-standard divisions. So if you split up this bar into 5 equal sections as opposed to 4 quarter sections. These are really uncommon. You might never even use these. It looks like there's a lot, but as I said before, for the majority of music making, you'll be using just this top section and maybe dipping into the triplet section. So I'll talk about the strength option in a bit, but first I'll spend a bit of time talking about the swing option. So if I loop this section and let it play, It's sounding straight timing wise. And then here it is with the swing slider at 100. See, these notes are staying where they are, the notes on the 1 and 3 of the beat. But these notes are shifting in position. Now, in terms of what swing is in theory, that's maybe for another video, but here's an example of how you can use that slider. So this still works on its own in terms of timing, it's just in what we call a swing rhythm. For this particular piece, I actually want it played really straight, so I'm going to keep it at 0, but that's another tool at your disposal, should you want to use it. So the strength option. The strength slider essentially controls how strong or weak you want the quantizing to be. So let's say I played this note a little bit late. Let's say I played this note here. Now if I then quantize that to the start of the beat, because strength is all the way to 100, it will quantize the note perfectly. If I had strength on 0, that wouldn't do anything. I've essentially turned off the quantize feature there. But look what happens when I gradually bring up the strength slider. It gradually gets closer to the line. Now, I quantized this first bar before, and it's quantized to a strength of 100. So it's perfectly quantized to the beat value that I've selected. But if I highlight all of the notes in this bar, and then put the strength slider the other way, so the strength of the quantization is affected. And you might be wondering, well, why would I want it any less than 100%? Why is this even an option? If I'm going to quantize something, I want it to be fully fixed, not just mostly fixed. And the answer to that is human feel. So as I touched upon briefly in a previous video, as humans, we're not going to play 100% accurately 100% of the time. A robot could do that, or some kind of automated instrument, for example. But sometimes in making something absolutely perfectly in time, you can make music sound quite robotic and lifeless. So the nuances of human feel and human touch when something is played, even though every note might not explicitly be right on the correct beats, can actually sound generally more appealing to us. So in some sense, when you fix every single tiny minute little error in someone's playing, you can take some of the soul and feel out of it. So a robotically perfectly timed piece of music might actually not sound as good. It can sound a bit lifeless. And Logic knows this, so that's why they give you this option. And I might just take a little bit of the strength off. So I'm fixing the slight errors in timing to a certain point. However, I'm not completely fixing it, so I can keep a little bit of that human nuance. Still aim to play it in time. Quantizing can be seen as a bit of a safety net to fine-tune any small errors that might need to be corrected. I think if you're more of a musician, you should generally aim for good timing in the first instance, without necessarily relying on quantization. But know that it's there, it's a tool that you can use, should you need it. And with music editing in general, remember the better it is straight out of the gate, the less tweaking you'll have to do later. I think if you're more of a producer, you might not be so bothered with inputting instrumentation super accurately in terms of timing when you go to play something in quickly. You might get a producer who just wants to play in a quick drum beat, quantize, done. And that's fine sometimes because there's more of a focus there on production as opposed to a musical performance of some kind. Just remember though, if what you play is way out of time, the quantization might not work.